my own private practice that looks at sustainable approaches to designing large and small projects, also teaching specialized courses in academia focused on sustainability through the lens of the circular economy, specifically looking at design for disassembly and construction and demolition waste streams, and how our industry has a little bit of a problem with that.
I'm Ross Kidder. I have a company in Los Angeles where we bring basically we bring liability buildings to our shop, and we material to build furniture and do the interiors of homes and create things for our product line.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all for participating in our webinar. We're really excited just to learn more and showcase the possibilities for reusing lumber and how good it looks and how awesome it is. So, Eric, without further ado, why don't you tell us the technology behind um, how Urban Machine is making reuse a reality instead of the landfill.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tori. Yeah, so at Urban Machine, as I mentioned, our mission is to convert 37 million tons of wood waste into premium lumber products. And when we were researching this problem a couple of years ago, the primary challenge is the fasteners, right? All these nails, screws, and staples that have done so well holding our buildings together are very hard to remove by hand. And so the reclaimed lumber market has remained relatively small, focused on kind of those real premium products coming out of barns and historical buildings. But still, the majority of the material heads to either landfills or incinerators. And so what we're trying to do is change that for a couple of reasons. One, we think it's a beautiful, high strength, high value material. And two, the economics of it. Lumber is still the predominant building material when it comes to residential construction, whether that's single family or multifamily. And so it has a dramatic impact on the affordability. And so as we saw during COVID, lumber prices increased 4 to 5x their normal values, which caused dramatic price increases in affordability and housing construction. And so we want to return this material back into the building ecosystem to bring some price control and certainty to it. We also have a challenge coming up here in the US. In the next 60 years, all our landfills will be full at our current rate. And so we want to divert one of the major contributors to landfill waste is wood. And so we want to return that back into building stock. And then also the key technology is now available. So about 5 years ago, we would not be able to solve this problem. We're leveraging a lot of great tech today with vision systems and high-speed gantries to solve this problem. This is a problem where nobody wants to work 40 hours a week manually pulling fasteners. And so this is a great opportunity to bring technology in to actually improve that. And so you can see we're using mechatronics, robotics, gantry systems to remove all the metal fasteners from the wood, and then we check it with a metal detector to make it all. It's a relatively simple problem, right? Removing fasteners, but it's requiring a lot of high technology, computer vision, AI algorithms that we're training to identify and remove those fasteners, and applying the latest technology to solve this problem. And as I mentioned, this is one where we're not replacing anybody's jobs. We're actually going to be creating jobs from this solution because we're going to take a product that currently goes through a grinder and instead clean it up, turn it into a high value stock in a local environment. And so our goal is to source all this material from major metropolitan areas, clean it up in those metro areas, and then turn it around within it. Now, one of the fun things about this particular problem is some of the things you learn. So we've put a little collection of nail pulling sounds together um, of what it sounds like testing our machine and removing fasteners. So these are some of the things that we didn't realize how noisy this operation would be when we started pulling these fasteners, but it's pretty cool. It's the sound of success that we look at. There we go. The other great thing about reclaimed lumber is the story it tells. The cool part is we can apply a simple QR code to the material to share that history of the story. Where'd that material come from? Did it come from a historic building? Did it come from a waste stream? Track that story, share that story, and then you can post that in your buildings. So as architects and designers, it's a great opportunity to put some story behind your building materials instead of, hey, it just came from a vendor down the street, but it actually came from maybe a previous building or a particular area. And so we're developing this technology to automatically print these QR codes onto the material we process. And then, as I was mentioning, keep it local. We want to source the material locally, process it, and then turn it back into products and back into the customer. Our goal is to do it within about 100 miles. Traditional virgin supply chain is you're going 1,000, 2,000 miles. That's a lot of carbon generated and moving that material via train or truck. So by keeping it local ecosystems, we can generate local jobs, and people can manufacture wood products in areas far from the trees. And then we're asking our design partners to specify deconstruction. During our research, when an excavator takes down a building, we get a small volume of reusable material. But when the building's deconstructed, we get much higher quality and a much higher volume. And so we really encourage designers to specify deconstruction in their projects with those particular buildings to increase the volume of material, not just wood, but then you also get metals and glass and partitions and all kinds of other components that can be reused in that local economy. And then for the wood, the great thing about lumber is we can regrade it. You can use it structurally. We can have graders come out. Glulam is a beautiful product. You can reuse that one as well. Unfortunately, we can't regrade it, but you can downgrade it and use it for other applications. But they're both beautiful products that can go back into it. And it takes about 90% less energy to create reclaimed lumber than virgin. Big advantage is our material is already dry. We don't have to run it through kilns. That's where a lot of that energy reduction comes in. And then the longer term is we're hoping, everybody designs to be deconstructed. We're hoping, stop using glues in projects. Glues have become very popular in the last 20 years. Unfortunately, they're very hard to undo. So we really encourage clients not to use glues. And there's some huge environmental benefits, right? You don't have the off-gassing and all the smells in buildings when you're not using glues on those. And then one more is we're developing a dowel laminated timber product with reclaimed wood. So we're spinning up a pilot plant that'll be online here at the end of 23 in December, and we'll start producing panels in Q1 of next year. This is a great product. It's a wood-to-wood fastener, and it really complements reclaimed lumber. It can be used as wall panels and ceiling panels. It can be load-bearing, and it's already in the code. It's already in the code as mechanically fastened lumber, so we don't have to do any updates to the code to get this into your buildings. So with that, I'll jump out of my slides and we'll go on to
Catherine.
Catherine.
Yep, thank you, Eric. That was great.
Thanks. I think, try sharing here.
Yeah, Eric, if you stop sharing, then we faster for her. We'll have to share the nail songs because that slide, the audio did not play, but it's really fun to hear all the nails being pulled. And as Eric said, kind of, that victory song. All right. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks. So I'll run through quickly a little bit of overview of our company. I think not everyone often knows who we are. And then share a couple projects and some sort of big picture questions we are working with. 3XN is a Copenhagen-based architecture firm. We were founded in 1986, and we have 4 satellite studios in addition to the Copenhagen headquarters. New York is one of those satellite studios. Although we started in Denmark and a lot of our early work is in Denmark, about 90 to 95% of our current projects are outside of Denmark. And so we're working in many jurisdictions and across many scales, looking at things like resilience and low carbon, particularly low embodied carbon, as well as sort of building reuse and circular design. Again, we have an office in Copenhagen. This is our headquarters. The office in New York runs our North American projects. And we also have a research and innovation consultancy. It started as a sort of department within 3XN, but in 2007 sort of spun out as its own company. About 50% of their work is on 3XN architecture projects, and about 50% is working in strategic consulting on topics such as sort of portfolio level embodied carbon studies, circular design innovation and material innovation for reuse of demolition waste. Our mantra as a company, both 3XN and GXN, is that architecture shapes behavior. This can be interpreted in a variety of different ways. I think in the context of material reuse and sort of the circular economy, I think what we're finding is that as I'm sure Eric and Ross and Dillon are all aware, the sort of industry for circular design and reuse of construction and demolition waste doesn't exist, and it particularly doesn't exist at scale. And so I think we see sort of our role in this process is changing how the design conversation is happening, starting to ask questions and adjust how we're designing new buildings or how we're sort of doing adaptive reuse to push the industry forward. So I'm going to run through two of our sort of representative timber projects. These are both new construction with new timber. And so sort of my role in this webinar is maybe more showing where the opportunity lies in how the industry can change. So T3 Bayside is a mass timber project in Toronto, and then I'll also talk about Cobot. Both of these projects are currently under construction. So T3 Bayside, when it's completed, will be the tallest mass timber office building in North America at a whopping 11 stories. It is a building that sort of it's two pairs of buildings, and it's in a new development on the Lake Ontario waterfront. The design of the project was focused on creating sort of a creative style workspace. It is a spec office building, but also thinking about how the public realm can be activated, but most importantly for this conversation, how we can create an office building that will be durable for the future. And durable meaning as an asset for the developer. And so there we started really thinking about the flexibility of the building over its lifetime. The building was designed with these steps that sort of create a necklace around the building. The steps are intended to be two-story spaces. Here you're looking, this is a rendering from one of the T3 buildings into the other, into public space. But the purpose of sort of bringing these around the full building, as you can see here, was to create optionality for tenants. And so this is where our company started to get into this idea of design for disassembly, or designing in what we call soft spots. And so over the life of the building, our intent is not that every part of the building can be adjusted and taken away, but that we design with intention such that the building can be adapted for different uses. In this instance, if a tenant wanted to take 2 floors and create an inter-story connection, that would be possible in these areas. And so here you can kind of see the design intent of those double-story steps. What that meant is that we had to design those spaces to be 2 stories, even if they were built with a slab there already. And so it required sort of thinking 50 years ahead to say, if someone were to make this space 2 stories, though it's now 1 story, what do we need to do to the structure to enable that? And so in each of the steps, all of the columns were designed to span 2 stories unpinned, so that the slab could be removed and added back in at will. And so here you can start to see how those steps connect to each other. And I'm going to run through the projects, and then I'll sort of bring some of the ideas back in at the end of the conversation. But Cobot Hub was similarly designed as mass timber. This is a much lower project. It's in Odense in Denmark. And it is a headquarters for 2 robotics companies. And so when we did sort of the programming analysis of the project, the idea was to create independent spaces for these robotics companies, areas of sort of mutual collaboration. They're both working on robots. The robots have different specialties, but we wanted a space where the robots could interact with each other and do robot things. As we started to create this village, we started to see the potential for this building to expand and contract according to the needs of the companies. It is 2 separate companies, but they're under one umbrella sort of owner, and that owner has other companies as well. And so the idea that this building could sort of grow and contract over its lifetime was something that really interested us. Here you can see one of the shared atriums between the spaces. And this is the building under construction. I think when we think about mass timber and sort of the potential of timber for reuse and adaptation, it is the structural system that is most logical for that purpose because it's a pinned connection. And so really using mass timber in this project provided both carbon benefit, but it also let us think about sort of the flexibility of the structural system and how we could add on to it, how we could take pieces away if they needed to make the space smaller, and how we could subdivide it in the future. And so here are some very early phase diagrams saying, here's a simple configuration. There is a sort of headquarters base at the back, but then sort of these little village pieces that could connect. We could expand that. We could create a courtyard in the middle, again, because these are sort of modular structural bays. We could also add atriums, and we could sort of continually expand. And so again, it sort of is this maybe general design idea of expansion and contraction, but made possible through the use of mass timber. So here you see a rendering of the interior space, but also a photograph of one of the connections. So again, I think this is, the projects I'm talking about are maybe more about new construction than reuse. But I think from a big picture perspective, timber is a very, very, very old material. Our office in Copenhagen is a 250-year-old shipbuilding warehouse from when Denmark and Sweden were at war with each other. And so that timber is all reclaimed because it was kept in place and reused. And on the flip side, we have mass timber, which is a newer, more innovative product, allows us to sort of bigger and taller with timber. And so although the properties are the same, they're very different in many ways. Which brings me to the question of how are we thinking about using reclaimed material in our projects? Or in other words, what's the reuse marketplace? We're doing a lot of new construction in timber. We're doing a lot of adaptive reuse as well, but less in timber at the moment. And so for us, the question is, how do we actually access the reuse marketplace? How do we access reclaimed materials at the scale that we're building at? And so this is a very simple diagram, but I think it starts to talk about sort of where we see the process needing to change. And it's very directly related to the work Urban Machine is doing with reclaimed lumber. In a typical process, of course, you start with the raw material, that becomes a manufactured product, it becomes installed, that material is deconstructed. I'm not suggesting we deconstruct the Empire State Building, but you deconstruct a building, you have that material, what happens to it? It goes into a reuse marketplace and it goes to new uses. That product doesn't re-enter the material supply chain in a way that buildings of a larger scale can use it, right? It's a smaller amount of material. There isn't sort of a marketplace approach to collecting similar types of demolition waste. And additionally, the specification on our projects typically happens after the manufacturing process. From our perspective and thinking about sort of the efficiency of the sort of overall industry, there's a loop that needs to be created where the deconstructed material actually re-enters the supply chain much earlier in the process, so that when we specify material as architects, we don't even really know that it's reused. This is sort of the ideal scenario, that we're working within a supply chain where reuse of material is just standard. Obviously this is a dream, but this is kind of how we're thinking about it in terms of our larger projects. We also are thinking a lot about what are the challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges is the risk associated with reclaimed material. I think when we think about structural steel and its reuse, it is sort of remade in a way. So it is upcycled, but it is remade into a new product. Timber doesn't have that same ability, right? It's a fiber product. And so thinking about sort of the risk and structural considerations of reusing a material like timber, I think is something the industry is going to have to sort of become comfortable with. And the second part of sort of what I wanted to talk about in terms of T3 and Cobot gets to the question of design for disassembly. How are we thinking, on the one hand about reusing reclaimed product in our buildings now, but also thinking about how the buildings we're building now can be reclaimed in the future? Or in other words, how are we designing for adaptation and building end of life? We have some sort of general strategies. Eric has named a couple of them. Don't use glue. Sort of minimize anything that can't be taken apart. Document the process so that someone does know how to take it apart, but also use recyclable materials when possible. So don't bank on the fact that we can invent or innovate a new way of using the product. And then, of course, the soft spots. And so this is really thinking about how we design T3, Bayside, and Cobot, thinking about designing buildings in a way where parts of them can be taken away and put back, and ensuring that those pieces can be reused and recycled so that our buildings can be adapted over the long term, that we don't build a building and 20 years later need to take it down because it doesn't meet our expectations or our needs. And so I think T3 is a really good example of how that process has been executed in a very small scale within a building by creating flexibility within the design itself to ensure that the building has a longer lifespan. So again, these are images that you've seen. And I think, again, being honest about the process, understanding what the challenges are with design for disassembly, the idea of taking pieces out of buildings, of selectively demolishing is very common. We know how to do it. We're not as comfortable putting pieces of structure back in. And I think the second part of the challenge of design for disassembly, especially with timber, in mass timber product is, we know how to put mass timber beams and columns together. We don't know how to effectively take them apart and be able to reuse those members without sort of losing the joint. And so thinking about sort of timber as a new, again, product in the market, these are kind of some of the questions that we're working with at the scale that we're designing. Thank you.
That was awesome. And, interestingly, and Eric can certainly speak to this from Urban Machine, but you said your wish is to have that lumber loop, and that's really what Urban Machine is creating, this space that didn't exist before between the deconstructionists and the lumber industry. So I might have to steal that slide because it's a good one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Dillon, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks.
And then we do have, while Dylan's pulling this up, we do have a question from Robert. He's asking if Urban Machine certified, like if our wood will get there. So, okay, Dylan, you're ready. Eric will answer that question afterwards.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
I wasn't sure if that was for me to
No,
answer.
that was
The answer, yes, they should be. Yeah, so as I mentioned in the initial introduction, I'm a licensed architect and the sole principal of my own small practice, ODP, based in Chicago, Illinois. And I've been teaching deliberately kind of bridging between academia and the built environment, or practicing to try and test out some of these ideas. And this area that we're all talking about, and the focus of my research, is to move from a linear economy to a circular economy. And what that really means is a paradigm shift in moving from a take, make, and throw sort of idea to the circular economy, which is take, make, and repeat. So one question, and it's becoming less of a question now that I think there's a growing sort of interest in this, is why do we care as humans? Why do we care as architects? Why do we care as engineers? Why do we care as technologists, etc.? It's because our industry has a habit of consumption, and we as humans are consumption based as well, right? And our industry is probably the worst on record. If we look at this graph, right, the built environment consumes massive amounts of materials, and materials that are unfortunately largely unable to be recycled, or really difficult to be recycled, as we're learning lumber is one of them. And as you look at this chart, right, it's 15 years outdated now. It's only getting worse. And we have only a finite amount of material left in the built environment, which means in the end of my lifetime, certainly, we're not going to be able to work with some of these materials, which is really kind of unimaginable to me, to think that copper will have disappeared by the time 30, 40, 50 years comes down the line. And I also briefly wanted to discuss wood, right? Because we all understand wood as a regenerative or sustainable material, but a big issue that I find is not the method of production, but the rate at which we're consuming it. So it's as bad as some of these other materials. Most managed forests, as you look at this diagram, are now in their second or third generation of growth, which is a direct result of this habit of consumption and disposal of old building stock, right? It's all going to the landfill, and we're just trying to harvest new material, that sort of linear economy. And when we compare it to old growth, as I think Eric has mentioned, right, we have smaller diameters, we have significantly more knots in our material, which is reducing the capacity of a standard 2x4, for example. Wood also is a natural material and is subject to external factors. One that we're currently dealing with in the Midwest and moving its way west, and certainly in the Northeast, is the emerald ash borer, which is just going through and eviscerating any of the ash trees that we have available to us, right? This is nothing new. The chestnut blight of the early 1900s was a similar situation. We're starting to see some of that come back, but there's other factors, right, that require us to think more sustainably or to practice better management of our materials, and wood is certainly one of those, just as those finite materials that we're mining out of the Earth's core is important as well. So I'd like to share just one project and a course that I'm teaching, Design for Disassembly. It's been brought up previously, and talk a little bit about how those two begin to feed off of one another, right? So my practice really focuses on collaboration and looking at commissioned work, which isn't just a sort of design and send it out to bid and construct, but what are the industry partners? Are there contractors? Are there other disciplines that can help inform how we design in a more sustainable approach? So the first project that I've tried to apply this to was a commissioned pavilion for an art and architecture festival in the fall of 2022. The project actually began about a year and a half before that. Not knowing it, I was approached by a developer looking to find sustainable strategies for material reuse in a building they were looking to renovate and tear down. Unfortunately, they were looking to save the facade, but the interior, they were simply asking, is there a better way to work with this material? So slated for demolition, the developer was interested in these strategies of reuse and how to reuse material as much as possible. They initially looked at these columns on the left and right images. They have a bit of ornamentation to them and said, be great if we could introduce those back as art. I was more interested in what was above those columns and all of the floor joists, which a 5-story building with about 100 joists at 18 inches on center was a massive amount of material that I saw as an opportunity, right? They had considered it a problem. It was too complicated to disassemble, as we know very well, right? Because it's been nailed together. It has a 100-year lifespan, a lot of change of flooring, finished ceilings that went into this material. But nonetheless, I said, actually, I think I can save you money in this process. And it turns out that they were totally on board with this. They were, when it comes down to finances, which many projects do, they didn't have to pay for tipping fees at a landfill to discard this material. Instead, I simply lined up a trailer. Their demolition team pulled sections of the building out, put them on a trailer. We hauled them just a block away into an empty parking lot and began to disassemble them, which, as you can see here, is not so easy when you have old lath and plaster on this. And another problem we had was labor, right? How does labor play a role in this? Eric mentioned, right, that they're actually producing more jobs. Equal advocate that these type of deconstruction and reuse is actually going to stimulate an economy and introduce more jobs. my labor was currently the chair of our department, which I drug out on the hottest day in August, I think, to help me. I'm sure she's not appreciative of this flattering picture of her, but right, people are interested in this topic and are willing to find ways to develop strategies for deconstruction. So that resulted in the salvage of about 300 old growth hemlock beams. The other 200 went to a stone mason who is reusing them as well. However, as we know from Urban Machine, right, these beams are not perfect and they're riddled with nails, chips, dings, life of 100 years, right? It takes on some wear and tear. The chips and dings are not the problem, but it's the nails. And I wish I would have met Urban Machine 2 years ago, but I can't always look backwards. As we looked at this in a very low-tech way, right, Eric was talking about scanning, we bought one of those wands that they have at concerts that they wand you with, and that was our metal detection system. Very low-tech, but got the point across. And we were really interested in using that as a design parameter or maybe a design constraint. So as we looked at this, we realized all the nails were located on the edge of the beam and the center line there became largely untouched. So again, looking back to the lumber industry for some inspiration, we started to look at how lumber is processed and thinking of that as an opportunity for ourselves. We could identify the nails based on their square head as early 19th century nails. We then understood the depth of them and were able to process the material without basically killing a lot of saw blades in the process. We did nick a few nails along, but that really led to a language and a system that was developed out of a set of components invested in the material logic. So rather than working with a perfectly pure 2x4, we were looking at how to leverage these different components and then how to leverage unique connection details in relation to the dimensional and physical properties of that material. So in this instance, of course, the nails. And to put it kind of simply, the nail sections became untouched. They were simply just rectangular and square profiles, whereas that kind of pure center was able to be processed and has a series of lap joints embedded into it and CNC'd into it, allowing for this system to be layered together. Additionally, we were really interested in design for disassembly and trying to push that to the maximum. So this actually doesn't use any screws either or nails. It's simply pure lumber. And we developed, maybe to steal one of Catherine's terms, softer connections in the form of nylon strapping. So everything is strapped together, allowing for true temporality of the material. Also thinking about the lifespan of this, maybe only lasting 3-6 months to a year. How would that then be disassembled in an efficient way and in an expeditious way as well? It also produced a real beauty in the character of the wood. To talk a little bit about the narratives that were brought up previously, we really found the kind of cuts that we made to be just enriching in terms of the quality of the material, and wanted to celebrate that. So we oriented certain members towards the sort of top of the project or towards the outside face in order to really express that beauty in the material itself. Again, looking at a lumber yard and its inherent idea of a temporary storage depot was part of the inspiration, and the project uses that notion that this is really just a temporal urban mine or depot where the material is stored, right? It's going to move on. It's going to have another life. A lot of these members are perfectly good and can be reused. So how do we think of this not as a permanent structure, but as a very short term, right? Even in the case of a pavilion that might be very short term. And again, it also addresses this question that was brought up over the pandemic of lumber prices and the volatility that came out of that. Lumber prices spiked right during the pandemic. We're still feeling some of the pain and repercussion of that. So how do we kind create a more sustainable and a more economical future for lumber. A lot of that goes into a topic of material passports and how do we use QR codes to tell stories of the material, to also store information and feed that back into building information modeling or something like that. That's a lot of what I'm interested in terms of how to apply some of these ideas to a project, and then also how to apply them through teaching. So I'll go very quickly through this. But Design for Disassembly was an advanced course that I've been teaching for 2 years now to upper year and graduate students in the College of Architecture. And through this lens, the course really introduces students to thinking about how things come apart rather than how they go together. We talk so much about tectonic craft and assembly. I'm interested in the other way around. So students were initially asked to take apart a consumer object that they found laying around. And through this act of deconstruction, students discover a range of connection details and then begin to draw those connection details as well and think about them as strategies that can be applied to the built environment. So with a class-wide catalog of connection techniques, students were then asked to apply these reversible connections to a project of their own, in this case a shed, a sort of glorified shed. And the students then began to prototype and work with one-to-one connection details, developing them as a part of the process. They were also asked to produce DCDs, as I call them. So rather than a construction drawing set, a deconstruction drawing set, and document how things go together in an IKEA fashion, also document how they would come apart, questioning what sort of information needs to be provided to a contractor, or how does our industry sort of need to change the process by which we're constructing buildings and, as has been mentioned before, ultimately deconstructing buildings. And going into excruciating detail, also thinking about text descriptions and how do you describe this process. So that became a really interesting process with understanding how much we know versus how much we think we know and how much we actually don't know. So the students all had to write out this description, give it to a classmate. That classmate had to read through that description and try and assemble their detail. Through that process, they really understood some of the holes that were involved in this, right? And that is a direct translation to what happens 15 years down the road when someone comes to your project and tries to deconstruct it, right? They don't know the history or the lineage of that. And thinking about how do we embed some of that information into a drawing set, into a material passport, and what is that living database looking like? So, of course, the class finally tested some of these details. Let me see if I can get this to play. And leverage more tools to develop disassemblable details, and then ultimately go together. What are used for that? What and how do we adapt things? Maybe even do you allow for more flexible structures to this course, which a lot of them find things, you never actually get to go out and manifest those ideas and here to see the actual deconstruction of that. So how easy is it to build something, but is it then possible to deconstruct that as well, and what do the processes involve? Yeah, I'm over my time limit, but thanks so much. I'll stop there.
That is okay. I think, all of us can relate to being a student, and our favorite teachers were the ones who were passionate, and you're clearly passionate about what you're teaching, and your students are lucky for it. That's awesome. Thank you. Ross,
Yeah.
are you able to share your screen? Show us some pictures.
Well, I didn't have much luck in the beginning here,
Okay.
but it's really a conversation too. So I really want to kind of talk about even hearing what you guys are talking about. I relate on many levels to Dillon and Catherine. Me, I'm definitely the one that is in this group is more kind of like I'm just on the floor. That's what I do. I'm the intensive version or the singular version of it. And I think it starts even then back to where Eric was talking about, the story and everything that it all starts with that. It starts with the one guy who does this, and then how can we turn something that is giant, that is bigger than that? Because what I actually, when I work in my shop, I have a lumber yard where we sell reclaimed lumber and Midwest lumber, and then we build stuff out of it from our fab shop. It's all I only build out of reclaimed materials. Um, but when you talk about the story and trying to so that people can start to use this material on a grander scale. Um, oh, look at that! You got a couple pictures. That's great.
Yeah, I threw that up there for you.
Amazing. So,
Yeah.
um, you know that happens on a single level. Most importantly, a human being, when they come into my shop, when someone wants a piece of, I don't really have to sell anything to them. Their mind and their heart is already where it's supposed to be if they're coming to a reclaimed lumber yard. So it's not like I have on reclaimed wood. Um, but we're looking at something that has aesthetic, that is gorgeous, that has old growth, like what knots. It's a much stronger material, and the beauty of it is the material. But I say this to all of my clients and my everyone I work with. The equal importance of this material is the story, and they would agree to pay the dollar for a custom piece of furniture because it's going to be a beautiful table. But equally as important to them is the story. People want, I think, especially right now in this day and age, people want to feel good about what they're purchasing. We're going over this. I don't know if it's a generational thing or what, but I see a younger and younger generation wanting to take pride in what they are spending their money on, what they're bringing home, and they want to have something that lasts a long time. So that shift I see on a day-to-day basis, based off of LA, where a lot of people yearn for something aesthetic to grasp onto because they live in a world of that have that. So I really think thinking about that, the grander scale, what you guys are talking about, I can relate completely to scale. So it's there, the heart is there, and we all need to kind of work towards the idea of making it something bigger. Denailing and everything too. I love your story, Dylan, of grabbing the wand. Those are necessary. We have like 20 of those, because with machinery, anybody that works with machinery on my level, we have all the awesome machines that we work with. But man, if you got a nail in that thing, it screws you up. It really does. And then if I bring stuff to a bigger mill, like sometimes I'll bring an order of TG to, like 5,000 to 10,000 square feet of tongue and groove. Then it screws you up even more because it's gonna ruin their knives, and then they're gonna charge you for the knives. So you end up spending a lot of money if you don't get the metal out of your wood. And what I've done is I've been denailing materials for 20 years, but it's fun because I now have the young guys. That's how they come in my mill department, and then they kind of work themselves up to fabrication a lot of times. But the first thing they do is they learn how to denail a piece of wood. and then I school them on it too, because I've been doing it for long. I can do it pretty, not to like pat myself on the back, but I've gotten pretty good at it. But it's level, it's I hate to say it, but it is the low end of the totem pole. You know, the group of guys that are they're what they have to do is denail a couple thousand square feet of wood. It's not the most glorifying job. I try to uplift them and let them know that it's the most important job for me, but it is a lot of sweat and sawdust, you know. So on my scale, I see this opportunity that is something that I could only dream of, you know, because on my scale it's such a smaller level, but for the masses, it's pretty amazing. Well, this is part of my product line right here. This is all old regrowth oak right here. I'm sorry, old barn, Ohio. We do a lot of barnwood, and people think, you know, it's kind of that thing where everyone's building out of barnwood right now. Barnwood is a material that I use because I have connection and I know how to build out of it, which a lot of people don't. With just anything that was reclaimed, and to be quite frank, it was because the material was free. I would dumpster dive. I'd go to these, you know, fancy streets in LA, and I would dumpster dive and I would jump and I'd get those old pieces of fur. You know, I would feel like a rich man because I'd truck with tons of that Doug fir and bringing it home. The first thing I'd have to do is denail it. But it always came to that point. Broke actor. I was a broke artist who wanted to pay my rent. So I would get free material and then I would build things and I would sell them. And so kind of went the other way. I've always been very environmentally conscious, but it wasn't about that at all. It's kind of the need to eat in the beginning. And then it turned into a production in a lumber yard and all that. And then, but through that time of that necessity, it grew into a standard. You know, when people would start to ask me to build out of something else, I'm a little stubborn in that way, where I found my way and I like doing things my way, which, you know, not the way of the masses. And I just said no. I said no to doing anything without reclaimed wood. And it got me this far where, you know, I've got a thriving business and I've got 15 employees and we build beautiful, beautiful stuff out of old reclaimed wood. And I don't have to, lose any of inside me to just use the material that I feel I have to use by any means. I'm definitely successful doing it just the way that I do it. Am I open to using other material? I think me and my wife, we talk about this a lot because she's, you know, we're 50-50 on my business. But we talk about that, you know, no matter what, in my world, I'm open to using sustainable materials. So sustainable materials is a widespread thing. It does not necessarily have to be the rafters off of an old barn. You know, I take things out of, you know, if the wood looks good, from people who are just trying to get rid of their fence. You know, if it's something that I can, I actually utilize it. One man's trash is another man's gold. And that's the way I live my life. Here, what you see here these are floating shelves. We do these like crazy. Everybody loves these in their houses. This is part of our product line too. We do the box shelves, which are like the thicker ones, or the thinner ones, which are just standard, you know, glue ups of material. Now, I think about that, what you were talking about, not to conclude on what everybody else is saying, but I had so much time to like take out that idea of building to take apart. And it's harder in my world, you know, it's harder in the furniture world to do that. I think maybe on a grander scale, like when you're talking about structural, it might be a stronger idea. Because for me, I need glue, I need things like that. But I also know how to think of my pieces as being repurposed as well, so that they might not come apart as easy, but they can be repurposed. Yeah. So, you know, I'm just thinking about that you're talking about celebrating the aesthetic. So when you come down to the main idea that I was talking about first, which is the pride and the history of where this material is from, that's most important. But then you celebrate the fact that this material will always hands down be more beautiful than anything that's present age, you know, unless you're looking at some awesome slabs. I mean, slabs are always beautiful just because they're gorgeous, but as for like dimensional lumber, you know, you don't find anything more beautiful than something that's been repurposed. And it's not just because it's old growth, because of the idea that it's, you know, 200 years old. It's because it's got character, it's got age, it's got story, it's got everything that you see in that piece of wood. And you can't stand that away. You know, you can't, my guys can't take that out of the wood. It always shows up. Beauty of the age and the history and the story of the wood. And barcode, that's an excellent idea for that. I do similar, but on a way more manual basis for what I do, which is I tell the story to somebody where their wood is from, because I know where all my wood comes from. And I tell them the story, and then sometimes, you know, they want me to write it out so they can put a plaque in on their wall or whatnot, so that they can personally take where it's from. But you know, the joke is because when someone comes in, mantle or something, you know, they're in awe of, you know, this old piece. And I tell them the exact story, and they get it. You know, they hear like the age, you know, about a piece of wood from like 1940, whatever, you know, from an old structure and this and that, and they're really into it. And the joke is that, you know, have that in their house, and the story is just going to get kind of softer as the time goes on. And someday there's going to be that party where he's got the glass. Like, you know, this old piece of wood, it's just a really old piece of wood and we love it. You know, it really comes down to that. Like, but no matter what the story is, like they're attracted to it, you know. Actually, you
Yeah.
can see this is my house. I use all I build, you know, my ceilings, my floors. My floors are all engineered flooring that I use the top layer. I skin my oak so that it's about 7 millimeters thick, and then I put it on birch and I create engineered flooring out of it. But yeah, I mean that's what I do, and I totally am like in awe of my presence first off of who's here, because I really respect what you and I understand the necessity for that too. I would love to be there and actually, you know, I'd love to see that how that thing actually functions, because it's still mind-boggling to me, because there's a lot of different kinds of metal, especially in past the you know, the 19th century. So I have a lot of like screws. I have no idea how that machine piece of wood, but I'm sure it would. Um,
We're working on that right now as we speak.
yeah.
Your the screws it's definitely, you know, come up more than once. So we are on a mission for that. And, you know, I have to say, I'm sure your clients and I am pretty happy your acting career didn't work out so well.
Totally. Well, I got my own stage now. I'm my stage is
Exactly.
the lumberyard, you know. I
Yeah.
The thing is too is you never know you're a salesman on anything you do until you find something you're extremely passionate about. And people are always like, "Man, you sell so good. You sell to, you know, anybody." But and I'm not a salesman at all. I just love what I do. I
Yeah.
love wood. Old wood is there's nothing like it. And fortunately, I have a wife and a partner who got on that bandwagon with me, and she's just as intense about it as I am. So that's what created something that is successful, you know, is just really, really having a passion for it,
That's
you
great.
know?
That's great. I want to
Yeah.
leave a few minutes. Thank you all for your awesome presentations and your information. But I want to leave a few minutes for some questions that people have asked. Eric, I let you know before that Robert asked about LEED certification for our lumber.
Yeah, so our lumber that we process, we have FSC certification for reclaimed, which is great. LEED does give you points for reclaimed lumber. So the great thing is we can do two things. We know the source of the material, so we can provide the logistics destination based on the project it's going into to help you with your lead credits for locally sourced material. And then using reclaimed material, you'll get points as well. So that one is more of a project specific calculation for you guys on the lead side. Depends on where your project is, where that raw material is coming from, and then what material you end up using. But yep, lead does award points for reclaimed wood.
And Melissa Wenzel has a similar question. She said that many states, most of them, won't allow wood to be reused without certification. If there are nail holes in them, how do we get around that? And yes, she's starting to re-explore what Minnesota's building codes are looking
Yeah,
like.
so in a building, all states except for Oregon and Washington do require regrading for it to go back into a building. The great thing is Oregon and Washington, their code allows for all dimensional lumber to automatically be treated as a number 2. So it does not require regrading, which is awesome. So hopefully more states follow suit. The good news is nail holes don't impact wood. Obviously, engineers took that into account because when you fasten wood in the first place, it doesn't degrade the structural integrity. What you're really looking for is the holes are treated much like a knot, right? It's a void in the fiber. So the grading rules that they apply to virgin wood apply to reclaimed wood. So, obviously if a plumber took a big 2-inch hole hog and ripped through a 2x4, that one's obviously not going to meet grade anymore. But nail holes, screw holes, staple holes, those don't impact the structural integrity of the wood. They're looking for cracks and major holes that impact it, similar to the original grading rules.
Robert has another question. Is there a going rate for raw reclaimed lumber?
That is a very broad question because
I
if
knew
you ask
you were
that to
gonna love that
Ross,
one.
who's doing like
Yeah,
oak from
I mean, there
barns,
is.
his is
It's
probably
at least in my world, there, my world's changed a lot in the last 15 years. I mean, I used to get a lot of my stuff for just a good, like, thanks for help me get rid of this kind of thing. And I think quality of the wood now, and the things that are more popular, you still get that, which is great. That's a great deal. Be the guy who gives somebody their certificate of it's going to done that with the state of California with government projects several times here, so that they get the right, they get to see that, show that it's gone to reclaimed use. But man, some of that material, like the stuff like that, if it's like white oak, and the price is for that kind of thing. So it's fine.
yeah,
It's part of the economy, understand what they have, and it shouldn't be something that people just get for free. It should be an equal trade of some sort.
yeah. I've seen folks selling it, at nonprofits that receive donated dimensional lumber from 25 cents a board foot. You can be spending well over $50 a board foot for some of those premium clear old growth material. And everything in between, right? It just age, character. Is it nail free, right? Nail free adds cost to it. If somebody's pulled all the nails out of it.
It's got that labor in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my mouse didn't want to cooperate. Sorry. And then Eric Ventura, he's thanking all of us for our presentation. And Eric is actually next Friday speaking to the other Eric in Vancouver's class. And his question is, when can your machine come to Vancouver? And when can he expect to be able to purchase one in the future?
Yeah. So second half of 2024, we're going to start delivery of the 12 machines that we'll build next year. So next year is our first production run. We're going to build 12 systems. Our goal is to deploy them to 6 metropolitan areas. LA is on the list. Vancouver, BC is on the list. Major, definitely areas that have a reclaimed lumber market, have sustainability, government incentives, goals, and partners that we can work with to operate them. So yeah, second half of next year, we'll start to see them out in the field.
Yeah.
Wow.
Keep following our progress, right?
Exactly.
And speaking of LA, Eric is also speaking at an event next month with the GFDA. So maybe Ross, you guys can get together. I just
I'd love
dropped
to.
the
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just dropped the GFDA link to the event, and in the chat on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So, oh wait, Robert has a very important question for you, Eric, and then we have to wrap it up because we're at our hour. But he's asking if there is a pre-order here in the Midwest. He's asking also. Robert, I'm in Chicago, and Dillon and I are pulling for Chicago to be the Midwest hub for a machine next year. But I'll let Eric answer.
Yeah, we'll be taking orders in certain locations in first quarter of next year. So definitely, Robert, reach out to Jory or Ashley on our team, and we'll chat with you about where you are and what you're looking for. But absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for your time today, both as presenters and as an audience. It's awesome to share ideas and see the light bulbs go on, even just amongst this little group who we've met together and kind of planned what we were going to talk about today, and still I saw light bulbs go on across the group. So that's awesome. Thank you, everybody.